My name is Leo Caldwell. I'm 39, and I work as a nurse over at Mercy General Hospital right here in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you were to ask me to describe my life, the only thing that would come to mind is a never-ending night shift. It's utterly draining and frequently chaotic, but I push through it all, trying my best to hold things together for the people who depend on me. I don't usually talk this much, but since you're here and seem ready to hear it, I'll lay it all out. I'm not looking for your sympathy, not at all. I just feel this is a story that needs to be told. It's a story about me, about Clara, and about Ava. And it's about the kind of wounds that never really fade, the ones I've been carrying since I can remember. My entire existence has been tethered to Raleigh. I grew up in a placid middle-class part of town, the kind lined with tidy red brick houses and shaded by massive old oak trees. I can still close my eyes and smell the charcoal from neighborhood barbecues that filled the humid air every Sunday afternoon. We were the picture-perfect American family, at least on the surface. My parents were white and staunchly conservative, and our lives felt as meticulously organized as the labeled bins stacked in our garage. My dad, Robert Caldwell, spent 3 decades as a banker at a local Bank of America branch before he finally retired. He was a rigid man. I can't recall ever seeing him without his shirt tucked in, even on a Saturday. Every meal was a lecture on the importance of traditional values, a sermon I learned early on to just tune out. My mother, Catherine, was a dedicated homemaker. The other wives on our street nicknamed her the Kitchen Queen, and for good reason. Her days were a blur of baking perfectly crisp cookies, holding tea parties for her club, and polishing our home until it was immaculate, so clean you could have eaten a meal right off the hardwood floors. I'm the oldest of 3 kids. My brother Nathan came along 3 years after me. He lives down in Atlanta now, selling insurance for a living. And then there was my sister Megan, who is 5 years younger than me and now teaches elementary school right here in Raleigh. Growing up, the 3 of us were a tight-knit crew. I can still feel the sun on my back as Nathan and I played endless games of basketball in the driveway, with a little Megan trailing behind us, seriously appointing herself the official referee for every single match. But people grow up, and you find your own paths. Slowly over the years, that closeness frayed, and the family get-togethers started to feel more like a mandatory performance than something to look forward to. As for who I am, I've never been the kind of person who commands a room. I'm quiet by nature. I'd much rather listen to someone else's story than tell my own, and I've always tried to just do what's right. I don't harbor any huge ambitions, no secret desires to become a millionaire or see my name in lights. All I've ever wanted is a straightforward life, one where I can be of use to others and then come home at the end of the day to the people I love. I suppose that's exactly why I ended up becoming a nurse. The work itself isn't glamorous, and the paycheck certainly isn't anything to brag about, but it has its moments. Every time I can ease a patient's suffering or just sit and hold their hand as they face their last moments, I feel a profound sense that my life has meaning. I never thought this would be my path. As a kid, my future seemed predetermined. My father was dead set on me following him into the world of finance, wearing a suit, sitting at a desk, living a predictable life. But everything changed when I was 16. My grandmother suffered a massive stroke, and I refused to leave her side during her last days in the hospital. I sat there for hours just watching the nurses. It wasn't just the way they administered her medicine or checked her vitals. It was how they cared for her spirit, offering a gentle touch on her arm or a quiet word of comfort that cut through the sterile beeping of the machines. In that sterile room, watching them, I knew with absolute certainty what I was meant to do. When I finally built up the courage to tell my parents I was going to study nursing, the air in the room went cold. My father just looked at me and scoffed, the disapproval written all over his face. "That's women's work," he said, the words sharp enough to cut. His dismissal stung, but it didn't change a thing. My mother's concern was more practical. She worried I wouldn't earn enough to support myself. But their combined disapproval only hardened my resolve. I threw myself into my studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, managed to graduate with honors, and landed a job at Mercy General almost immediately after. Those early years in Raleigh were defined by their simplicity. I found a small apartment within biking distance of the hospital, and that old 10-speed became my main form of transportation. I spent what little free time I had reading novels or watching baseball on TV. I was never the type for late-night parties or chasing one relationship after another. My friends, who were mostly colleagues from the hospital, constantly gave me a hard time for living like a man twice my age. But I was genuinely content. I didn't need much to be happy. A strong cup of coffee in the morning, a relatively smooth shift, and a solid night's sleep were enough for me. Everything in my quiet, ordered life changed the night I met Clara Ellison. I was 25 at the time. The hospital was throwing one of its big charity galas, this one to raise money for kids with congenital heart defects. I can't stand crowded formal events, but my department head had insisted I go as a representative for the nursing staff. So there I was, hiding in a corner and nursing a glass of orange juice, doing my best to look invisible. And then, through the blur of people, I saw her, Clara Ellison. She was 27, and she didn't just stand in the crowd. She held its center like a fixed point of light. She was wearing a stunning emerald green dress, and her dark, curly hair fell around her shoulders. The smile on her face seemed to warm the entire cavernous room. She was speaking with a small circle of wealthy donors, her voice carrying across the space. It was confident and warm, completely without a trace of arrogance. I had no idea who she was, but it was obvious she was important. Everyone there seemed to want a moment of her time. I felt a world away and had absolutely no intention of trying to bridge that gap. I'm just not built to initiate conversations with strangers, especially not with someone as radiant as Clara. But it seems fate had a different script in mind. I'd gone up to the bar to get a glass of water when she accidentally backed right into me, sending a splash of red wine cascading down the front of my white shirt. I froze on the spot. She was instantly mortified, her apologies tumbling out one after another. "Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly sorry," she said, her face a mix of worry and an oddly charming cheerfulness. "I wasn't watching where I was going. Let me get you something for that." She rushed off to grab a fistful of paper towels. "It's okay, really," I managed to mumble, trying to get my heart to stop hammering against my ribs. "This shirt was cheap anyway." She laughed, a bright, genuine sound that somehow made me forget all about the growing crimson stain. "Thank you for being so nice about it. I'm Clara, by the way." "And you are?" "Leo," I replied, my voice steadier now. "Leo Caldwell. I'm a nurse here." Her eyes, which were wide and bright like sunlight, lit up. "A nurse? That's incredible. I have so much admiration for people who do what you do. Tell me, what's it really like?" And just like that, we were talking. I learned that Clara worked in communications, writing for a local nonprofit. She was whip-smart, funnier than anyone I'd ever met, and possessed an effortless ability to make you feel like you were the only person in the room. We talked about everything: my grueling night shifts, the articles she was passionate about, our shared love for old jazz music, and our mutual disgust for raw tomatoes. When the event finally wound down, I somehow summoned every ounce of courage I had and asked for her number. She smiled, that dazzling smile again, scribbled it on a cocktail napkin and handed it to me. "Call me, nurse," she said. It took me 2 full days to work up the nerve to actually make that call, an entire 48 hours spent rehearsing what I would say. We met at a little cafe not far from the News River. Our first date stretched on for 3 hours, which quickly led to a second and then a third. I can't pinpoint the exact moment I fell in love with her. Maybe it was when she described her own childhood in Charleston, growing up in a middle-class black family with a father who taught history and a mother who worked as an accountant. Maybe it was the night she read me a poem she'd written, her voice shaking with the raw power of her own words. Or maybe it was that simple, perfect moment during an evening walk when she reached for my hand, laced her fingers through mine and said, "Leo, you are the kindest man I have ever known." I felt like I could have floated home. Clara wasn't just my partner, she felt like my other half, the person who made me want to be a better man. Our connection was built on a foundation of shared values, a deep sense of compassion, a commitment to fairness, and a shared belief that the world could be a better place if people just tried a little harder. There was no doubt in my mind. I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this woman. 2 years after that first meeting, I proposed to her in a quiet little park, under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. The ring wasn't some giant, expensive diamond. It was a simple silver band I had saved for months to buy. I got down on one knee, my hands trembling so badly I almost fumbled the box and managed to get the words out. "Clara, you are the light of my entire life. I can't promise you the whole world, but I can promise to love you and protect you for as long as I live. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded and threw her arms around me, pulling me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. It was, without a doubt, the happiest moment of my life. But that happiness wasn't shared by everyone. When I told my parents about Clara, the atmosphere in their house turned frigid. I can still see it so clearly, the three of us sitting in their formal living room, my parents staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and profound disappointment. My mother was the first to speak, her voice shaking with a barely concealed tremor. "Are you serious, Leo? A black woman? What will people say? What about this family, our heritage?" I was completely floored. I'd always known my parents were conservative, but I never imagined they would react with such raw, unvarnished prejudice. My father's voice, when he finally spoke, was like ice. "She might be a perfectly nice person, son, but she does not belong in our world. If you go through with this marriage, don't expect us to welcome her." I tried to reason with them to make them see Clara for the intelligent, talented, incredible woman she was. The woman I loved more than anything. But it was like talking to a brick wall. My mother even had the audacity to say that Clara would taint our bloodline and drag me down. The words hung in the air, ugly and suffocating. I walked out of their house that day with a profound ache in my chest, the painful realization dawning that the family I had always loved was not the family I thought I knew. Nathan and Megan were neutral at first, but over the next few weeks I could feel them pulling away. Nathan called and told me I was making a big deal out of nothing, while a worried Megan asked if I was absolutely sure about this. I knew our parents were in their heads twisting things, but their lack of support still cut me deep. I really thought they would have my back. Despite all of it, my resolve never broke. I loved Clara, and I believed our love was the only thing that truly mattered. About 2 months later, Clara and I were married in a small, beautiful church in Charleston. My parents did not attend, neither did Nathan or Megan. The pews were filled with our closest friends, my colleagues from the hospital, and Clara's family, who embraced me from the very beginning as if I were one of their own. The moment Clara started walking down the aisle in her wedding dress, every bit of pain and anger I'd been carrying simply melted away. She looked like something out of a dream, and as we stood there exchanging our vows, I knew with every fiber of my being that I had made the right choice. Our marriage was a tapestry of happy days. Clara brought a kind of joy into my life that I had never known was possible. We bought a small house in a quiet Raleigh suburb, with a little yard where Clara spent hours meticulously planting flowers of every color. I kept my job at the hospital, and Clara continued to climb the ladder at her organization, eventually becoming the director of communications for a large national nonprofit. We spent our evenings talking about the future, dreaming of starting a family, of having children, of taking trips to faraway places we'd only seen in magazines. A year later, our daughter Ava was born. Ava was our own personal miracle. She had my eyes, but Clara's radiant smile, and her skin was a beautiful, warm brown, like a perfect summer day. The first time I held her in my arms, I felt like I had been fundamentally transformed. I was suddenly stronger, more responsible, a man overflowing with a love so fierce it almost scared me. Lying in the hospital bed, exhausted but glowing, Clara looked over at me and smiled. "Leo," she whispered, "she is going to do incredible things." I had no idea then that her words were more than just a mother's loving hope. They were a prophecy. But before Ava could begin to work her own miracles, life delivered a blow so devastating I didn't think I would ever be able to get back up. Those first years of our marriage were a blur of simple, happy days. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, but we had everything we needed. In the mornings, I'd make coffee for both of us while Clara made toast with peanut butter, her absolute favorite. We'd sit together at our little kitchen table, laughing about the silliest things, the way Clara always managed to spill her coffee when she got excited telling a story, or how I could never seem to remember to lock the back door. Those small, ordinary moments were the bedrock of my happiness. When Ava was born, our life felt even more full, more perfect. I can still remember the first night we brought her home from the hospital. I barely slept a wink, just sat by her crib all night, watching the steady rise and fall of her tiny chest, gripped by an irrational fear that if I closed my eyes for even a second, this perfect little miracle would disappear. Clara teased me gently. "Leo, you don't have to pull a night shift at home, you know. Go to sleep. She's fine." But I just couldn't look away from Ava. She was so impossibly small, her little hand wrapped tightly around my finger. I knew in that quiet moment that every choice I made for the rest of my life would be for her. Parenthood was not easy. Clara and I were in a constant state of sleep deprivation, taking turns rocking Ava back to sleep when she cried in the middle of the night. I quickly learned how to change diapers, mix formula just right, and sing off-key lullabies I never would have imagined myself singing. Clara, even when she was utterly exhausted from her demanding job, always found the energy to play with Ava, to read her books, and to tell her stories about her own childhood in Charleston. We would talk for hours about the future, imagining Ava growing up, going to school, maybe becoming a doctor or a writer, whatever she set her heart on. "You know," Clara said to me one evening, "I want Ava to grow up to be confident. I want her to be unafraid of anything, no matter how cruel this world can be." But the world, as I was about to discover, was far crueler than either of us could have ever imagined. It was 2015 and Ava had just turned 2. She was beginning to babble her first words, loved to toddle around the house on her tiny, unsteady legs, and was completely obsessed with the colorful comic books Clara bought for her. Our life was hectic, but it was a happy kind of hectic. I had recently been promoted to head nurse on my floor, and Clara had been invited to be a keynote speaker at a major conference in Washington, D.C. I was bursting with pride for her, but I also felt a strange sense of unease. Clara's job often required her to work late or attend evening events, and even though Raleigh was a relatively safe city, I never liked the idea of her being out by herself after dark. That night, November 14th, was bitterly cold. Clara was downtown at a charity dinner, a fundraiser for refugee children. She called me around 9 o'clock, her voice bright and full of energy. "Leo, I'm almost done here. It was a really great night. You would have loved the people I met tonight. I should be home in about an hour. Kiss Ava for me." I smiled, told her to drive carefully, and went back to the task of getting Ava settled into her crib for the night. But Clara never came home. By 11, a knot of worry had started to tighten in my stomach. I called her cell, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text. No reply. My heart began to race, a sick feeling of dread creeping into my chest. I tried to tell myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe she was stuck in traffic, maybe her phone battery died. But when the clock on the wall ticked past midnight, the panic became unbearable. I couldn't just sit there anymore. I called a colleague who lived nearby and begged her to come over and watch Ava. Then I jumped in the car and drove toward the event venue downtown. When I got there, the street was a chaotic scene of flashing blue and red lights. The police had cordoned off the entire block. An ambulance was parked at the curb, its lights painting the faces of the murmuring crowd in stark flashes. I heard someone whisper the word, "Attack." A primal fear took over. I started running, shoving my way through the onlookers, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. A police officer grabbed my arm, stopping me, asking me who I was. "My wife!" I shouted, my voice raw and desperate. "Clara Ellison, where is she?" They led me down a narrow alleyway just off the main street, and that's when I saw her. She was lying on the cold pavement, a dark pool of blood spreading out from under her coat. Clara, the light of my entire life. She was just there, completely motionless. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands fumbling for hers. I called her name again and again, but there was no response. The paramedics were working on her, their movements urgent and focused, but I already knew. I'm a nurse. I've seen that look in a first responder's eyes 100 times, the look that says there is no hope left. Clara was rushed to Mercy General, the same hospital where I worked every day. I rode in the back of the ambulance, clinging to her hand, and then sat by her gurney in the ER, praying for a miracle that I knew wasn't coming. No miracle came. Clara died at 1 o'clock in the morning, right there in my arms, in the very same hospital where I had helped save so many other lives. The attending physician told me she had died from massive blood loss caused by multiple stab wounds. I don't think I heard another word he said after that. My entire world simply collapsed, leaving nothing behind but the frantic thumping of my own heart and the searing image of Clara's eyes, closed forever. The horrific truth came out over the next few days. Clara had been attacked by 3 white men as she walked to her car. They had targeted her for no other reason than the color of her skin. A hate crime, the police report called it. They had screamed vile, racist slurs at her, taunted her, and then they had stabbed her. The attackers were apprehended a few days later thanks to a security camera and the testimony of a brave witness who had seen them running from the scene. But the trial that followed was a second, deeper kind of agony. The perpetrators were sentenced to just a few years in prison, the judge citing a lack of evidence for intent to kill. As one of them was led out of the courtroom, he actually smirked in my direction. Justice, a concept I had once held as sacred, revealed itself to be nothing more than a sick, twisted joke. I don't have the words to describe what I felt in that moment. It was a hurricane of pain, rage, and utter helplessness that tore through my chest. I wanted to scream until my lungs gave out. I wanted to smash everything in sight. I wanted revenge. But then I would look at Ava, my sweet 2-year-old daughter, sleeping soundly in her crib, and I knew I couldn't let myself break. Clara had left Ava in my care, and I had to keep going. I had to be strong for our daughter. The months that followed Clara's death were the bleakest of my entire life. I went back to work just 2 weeks after the funeral, not because I was ready, but because I had to. I needed the money to raise Ava on my own. I moved through my shifts like an automaton, tending to patients, administering injections, checking vitals, but inside, I was a hollow shell. Every time I had to walk past the trauma bay where Clara had died, it felt like another knife twisting in my gut. At home, I did my best to be a good father, but it was an impossible task. Ava was too young to comprehend where her mother had gone, but she felt her absence acutely. She cried more often, clung to me constantly, and every single time she called out for Mama, my heart would shatter into a million pieces. I read to her. I sang to her. I forced myself to smile even as tears were stinging my eyes. On nights when I had to work a shift, I'd bring Ava to the hospital with me, letting her sleep in the staff lounge on an old, worn-out armchair wrapped up in a scratchy hospital blanket. My colleagues pitied me. I could see it in their eyes. They took turns holding Ava. They brought me food, but no one and nothing could ever fill the gaping void that Clara had left behind. In a moment of desperation, I tried to reach out to my parents, hoping that this tragedy might somehow bridge the chasm between us. I called them. I wrote letters. I told them about Clara's murder, about Ava, about how much I was struggling to keep my head above water. Their response was a wall of silence. My mother sent a single terse text message. "We're very sorry to hear about Clara, but you chose this path." I don't know what I was hoping for, but their chilling indifference made me realize that I was well and truly on my own. Nathan and Megan remained silent too. The family I had once seen as my safe harbor was now nothing more than a painful, distant memory. But no matter how much it hurt, giving up was not an option. I had to keep living for Ava, my 2-year-old daughter who needed me. My days fell into a grueling routine. I'd wake up before dawn, make her oatmeal, drop her off at daycare, and then rush to the hospital for my shift. I scrimped and saved every single penny. There were no more visits to the coffee shop, no new clothes for myself, not even the occasional baseball tickets I used to enjoy so much. Everything I had, everything I did was for Ava. I was determined to give her a good life, to make sure she would never suffer the way I was suffering. But I couldn't build a fortress around her. I couldn't shield Ava from the realities of the outside world. When she started preschool, I became painfully aware that her skin color, Clara's beautiful skin color, made her a subject of curiosity and judgment. One afternoon, as I was picking her up from school, I overheard another mother whisper to her friend, "That's the mixed-race girl, the one whose mom died when she was 2, right?" Such a shame. I felt a hot flash of anger, but I pushed it down, gripping Ava's hand a little tighter. I knelt down so I was at her eye level and said, "You are the most special girl in the entire world, Ava. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel any different." Ava, though she was still so young, seemed to understand. She wrapped her little arms around my neck and hugged me tight, and in that moment I knew I would do anything on earth to protect her. But I had no idea that soon enough it would be Ava, with her small but incredibly resilient heart, who would be the one holding me up. The years after Clara's death blurred into one long, exhausting journey of grueling days and sleepless nights. My entire existence revolved around Ava. But there were moments, late at night, when I would lie awake and wonder if I really had the strength to give her the kind of happy life Clara had always dreamed of for her. I was just a nurse, not some kind of superhero. I didn't have any extra money, no family to fall back on, and no emotional energy left to even begin to soothe the constant ache in my own heart. But I had Ava, and she was the one and only reason I forced myself out of bed every morning, even on the days when all I wanted to do was pull the covers over my head and never wake up again. Being a single father was a challenge unlike any shift I'd ever worked at the hospital. There were no protocols to follow, no colleagues to back me up, and absolutely no breaks. I was Ava's dad, her mom, and her best friend, all rolled into one. Every single day began at 5 in the morning. I'd make oatmeal for Ava, always adding a little extra honey because she had a sweet tooth. Then I'd drop her at her daycare center and race to Mercy General for a 12-hour shift, sometimes 16 if we had an emergency. After work, I'd pick Ava up, throw together a simple dinner of pasta or mashed potatoes, and we'd sit together while she told me all about the pictures she'd drawn at school or chattered on with her innocent stories about her friends. Ava grew up surrounded by my love, but she also grew up in the long shadow of our loss. She was far too young to have any clear memories of Clara, but I saw my wife and our daughter every single day, in her radiant smile, in the way her eyes sparkled when she was listening to a good story, in the way she would wrap her arms around my neck and hug me tight whenever she sensed I was sad. I tried my best to tell Ava about her mother to keep her memory alive. I told her how much Clara had loved her, about all the dreams Clara had for her future. I read her the same picture books that Clara used to read to her. I even tried to sing the songs Clara had loved, despite my terrible off-key voice. When Ava would ask, "Daddy, where's Mommy?" all I could do was hold her close and say, "Mommy's in heaven, sweetheart, and she's watching over you, always." The world outside our little bubble was not always kind to Ava. By the time she was in preschool, she was starting to notice that she was different from the other kids. Her beautiful brown skin, inherited from Clara, made her a target for curious stares and sometimes cruel whispers. I'll never forget the day I went to pick her up from school and overheard another child say, "Ava doesn't look like her dad, she's so dark." I saw Ava standing there, her head bowed, her little hands clenched into fists at her sides. I knelt down in front of her, gently wiped the tears from her cheeks, and said, "You are the most beautiful girl in the whole world, Ava. You look just like your mom, and she was the most wonderful person I have ever known." She gave me a small, watery smile, but I knew those careless words had left a mark. I tried so hard to protect Ava, but I couldn't shield her from everything. I taught her to be proud of who she was, to hold her head high, to not let the ignorance of others hurt her. But deep down, I was terrified. I was afraid that this world, the same world that had stolen Clara from us, would find a way to hurt Ava too. And I was afraid that I wasn't strong enough to help her navigate it all. But Ava, even as a small child, was so much stronger than I ever gave her credit for. She had a resilient spirit, a creative soul, and a talent that I didn't fully recognize until she was about 6 years old. When Ava turned 6, she developed a passion for writing. And I don't mean the typical scribbles of a first grader, a few simple lines about a pet cat or a tree in the backyard. Ava wrote long, intricate, and wildly imaginative stories. One afternoon, I came home from work and found her at the kitchen table, furiously scribbling in one of Clara's old notebooks. "What are you writing, sweetie?" I asked. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with excitement. "It's a story about a girl who can fly, Daddy," she said. "She lives on a planet where all the trees can talk." I smiled, thinking it was just another one of her imaginative games. But when I looked over her shoulder and actually read what she had written, I was absolutely stunned. Her story went on for dozens of pages with a tight, coherent plot, vividly drawn characters, and magical details that I couldn't believe a 6-year-old could possibly conjure. She was pulling inspiration from the stories I told her, from Clara's old picture books, and from the boundless depths of her own imagination. I sat there with Ava, listening to her describe this incredible world she had created, and for the first time since Clara's death, I felt a tiny spark of genuine light flicker in my heart. From that day on, I encouraged Ava to write as much as she wanted. Every evening after dinner, we would sit together at the kitchen table. I would read a book or catch up on paperwork, and she would write. She wrote about kingdoms in the clouds, about dragons who sang, and about brave girls who fought monsters. I didn't realize it at the time, but those stories weren't just childish fantasies. They were Ava's way of processing the world around her, of dealing with her mother's absence, and of coping with the judgmental stares she sometimes got at school. When Ava was 7 years old, she finished a story that was over 100,000 words long, a full-fledged fantasy novel. I read the entire thing, and even though I'm no literary critic, I knew it was something truly special. Ava looked at me, her expression as serious as any adult's, and said, "Daddy, I want to send this to people. I want them to read it." I was taken aback, but I was also incredibly proud. I didn't know the first thing about the publishing world, but I started doing my research. I began sending Ava's manuscript out to small, independent publishers, along with a simple, clumsy cover letter. "This is my daughter's story. I hope you will read it." Most of them never replied, but one day when Ava was 8 years old, a letter arrived from a small press based right here in North Carolina. They wanted to publish Ava's book. I will never forget that moment. Ava leaped out of her chair, threw her arms around my neck, and yelled, "Daddy, I did it!" I held her tight, tears of joy and relief streaming down my face. It wasn't just about the book deal. It was because in that moment I saw Clara shining through Ava so clearly. I saw her strength, her boundless creativity, her stubborn refusal to ever give up. Ava's book, The Girl in the Clouds, was released in 2022 when she was 9 years old. It wasn't just a modest success, it became a phenomenon. Local newspapers ran stories about Raleigh's own child prodigy. Readers fell in love with Ava's story and its brave, brown-skinned heroine who fought for justice in a magical, fantastical world. The book sold tens of thousands of copies, and for the first time in years, I could finally breathe a little easier financially. I used the money from Ava's book to pay off our debts, get the roof repaired, and open a college savings account for her. But more important than any of that, I got to watch my daughter grow into the confident young woman that Clara had always dreamed she would be. Then when Ava was 11, she did something I never would have anticipated. She wrote another book, but this time it wasn't a fantasy novel. It was an autobiography. It was a book about me, about Clara, and about our family's journey. She called it simply, My Father. In its pages, Ava wrote about the love I had for Clara, about her mother's tragic death, about all those nights I had to bring her to the hospital with me, and about how I had tried my very best to make her happy. She wrote with a sincerity and an emotional depth that brought me to my knees. I had no idea that Ava had been observing me so closely all those years, that she understood the pain I had worked so hard to conceal. "Daddy, I want the world to know how amazing you are," Ava said when she showed me the finished manuscript. I hugged her, completely speechless. I didn't feel like I deserved such praise, but my daughter saw something in me that I had never been able to see in myself. I sent the new manuscript to Ava's publisher, and they immediately offered to publish it. My Father was released in 2024 when Ava was just 11 years old. The book wasn't just a success in the United States, it became a global sensation. Ava, the 11-year-old girl with the resilient heart, became a world-famous young author. She appeared on talk shows and was invited to speak at schools, talking to other kids about the power of writing and the importance of overcoming hardship. The book sold millions of copies, bringing in an amount of money I could barely comprehend. I no longer had to worry about our finances, but what made me truly proud was Ava herself. She had taken our family's pain and transformed it into art. She had turned our scars into a source of light for others. But Ava's success brought with it a new set of challenges. As her fame grew, the world's attention on us intensified. Many people admired Ava and her story, but not everyone did. I would read the comments online, people calling her an overhyped kid, or worse, spewing hateful insults about her skin color. I did my best to shield her from all of it, but she was far more perceptive than I gave her credit for. One evening, she said to me, "Daddy, I know that not everyone likes me, but I don't care. I write because I want to, and I write for Mom." I looked at my daughter, and in that moment I saw Clara so clearly. I saw the strength that my wife had passed down to her, a resilience that I had never possessed myself. Ava wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was my guiding star. The reason I had kept putting one foot in front of the other all those times I wanted to just stop. Our lives had changed dramatically, but at my core I remained the same man. I was still a nurse, still a father, still just a man trying to do the right thing. I still work my shifts at Mercy General, I still take Ava to the park on the weekends, and I still read to her every night. But now, more often than not, Ava is the one telling the stories, and I am the one who gets to listen. She talks about dreams that are bigger and bolder than ever before, about new books she wants to write, about starting a foundation to help other kids like her, kids who have been treated unfairly by the world. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know this one thing with absolute certainty. Ava is the miracle that Clara spoke of all those years ago. And no matter how cruel this world can be, I will spend the rest of my life doing everything in my power to protect her, to make sure her light keeps shining as brightly as it possibly can. In 2024, Ava's life and my own were completely transformed. Thanks to the overwhelming success of her autobiography, My Father. Our financial worries were a thing of the past. I kept my job as a nurse at Mercy General not because we needed the income, but because it's a fundamental part of who I am. It was also a way for me to stay connected to my old life, to the days I shared with Clara. Ava, now 11, had become a star, a famous young author who appeared on television, spoke at schools, and inspired millions of people around the world. But to me, she was still just Ava, the little girl who loved toast with extra honey, who hugged me goodnight every single evening, and who mercilessly teased me for my terrible singing voice. I thought I had finally learned how to live with the pain of losing Clara, how to juggle my job and the demands of raising Ava while keeping my own heart from completely shattering. But then one late afternoon in the autumn of 2024, a phone call from my mother turned my carefully constructed world completely upside down. After nearly a decade of almost total silence, she called me. Her voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Leo," she said, "your father and we want to see you and Ava. This Thanksgiving, please come home. We're family no matter what." I just stood there in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, my heart hammering in my chest. A part of me wanted to just hang up, to scream at her that they had disowned me, that they had abandoned me when I needed them most. But another part of me, the part that still held faint, faded memories of playing basketball in the driveway with Nathan and the smell of my mother's freshly baked cookies, made me pause. I glanced over at Ava, who was sitting at the kitchen table, already lost in a new story she was writing. And I thought, maybe this is a chance for her to know her grandparents, a chance to maybe, just maybe, begin to mend what had been so badly broken. I agreed to go, even though my heart was heavy with a sense of deep unease. That Thanksgiving, Ava and I made the 2-hour drive to my parents' house in the Raleigh suburbs. The house looked exactly the same. The red brick facade, the giant oak trees in the front yard, the smell of pumpkin pie wafting from the kitchen. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt like a complete stranger in my own childhood home. My parents, now in their late 60s and with more gray in their hair, looked at me with the same cold, disapproving eyes they'd had the day I told them I was marrying Clara. Nathan and Megan were there too, with their spouses and their children. A gaggle of white blonde kids running around the house, their laughter echoing off the walls. Ava squeezed my hand tighter as we walked in. She was wearing a pretty green dress and her curly hair was neatly tied back. She had a smile on her face, but I could see the wariness in her eyes. I knew how sensitive she was. She could feel the tension in the room as keenly as I could. My mother gave me a hug, but it was stiff, brief, and incredibly awkward. My father just gave me a curt nod and said, "Thanks for coming, Leo." They both looked at Ava, their faces arranged in polite smiles that didn't come anywhere near their eyes. "You've grown so much, Ava," my mother said, her voice cloyingly sweet and utterly insincere. "You look just like your mother." The dinner that followed was thick with a strained, uncomfortable atmosphere. The table was groaning with food, a huge turkey, mashed potatoes, cornbread. But I felt none of the warmth of the Thanksgivings of my youth. Nathan and Megan chatted animatedly with each other, asking about their jobs and their kids' latest accomplishments, but no one directed a single question toward me or Ava. The other grandchildren, Nathan's and Megan's kids, were showered with attention by my parents. They were given expensive gifts, new electronic toys and fancy sweaters. Ava received one small token gift, an old dog-eared picture book that I was sure my mother had just unearthed from a dusty box somewhere in the attic. Ava smiled and thanked them politely, but I saw the light in her eyes dim just a little. The mood at the table only grew more toxic as the dinner wore on. My mother couldn't stop gushing about her other grandchildren. "Nathan's boy is so clever, he's definitely going to be a doctor," she cooed. "Or Megan's little girl sings like an angel." But she said nothing, not a single word about Ava, even though the entire world knew her as a celebrated best-selling author. I tried to keep my composure, squeezing Ava's hand under the table, praying she wasn't noticing the blatant favoritism. After dinner, all the kids gathered in the living room to play a game. They were divided into teams for a scavenger hunt in the backyard. Ava, with her naturally enthusiastic spirit, jumped right in, eager to play along. She found one of the hidden items, a small doll, and held it up excitedly. But then one of her cousins, Nathan's son, ran over and snatched it right out of her hand, yelling, "That's mine! You can't have it!" Ava, startled but holding her ground, replied, "I found it fair and square. That's the rule." My mother, her own grandmother, was standing nearby and overheard the exchange. Her face flushed with anger. She marched over to Ava, and before I could even process what was happening, she slapped my daughter hard across the face. The sharp, ugly sound echoed through the yard, silencing everyone. Ava stood there, completely frozen, her small hand covering her cheek, her eyes instantly welling with tears. My mother screamed, her voice shrill and full of venom. "You ungrateful little black girl! Who do you think you are, trying to compete with your cousin?" Time seemed to grind to a halt. My heart felt like it had been shattered into 1,000 pieces, but then a wave of pure, white-hot rage surged through me like a fire. I rushed to Ava's side, pulled her into my arms, and gently tilted her face to check her cheek. A bright red handprint was already blooming on her beautiful brown skin, but what hurt me more than anything was the look in her eyes. It wasn't just pain. It was a look of profound, soul-deep hurt. I stood up and faced my mother, my voice shaking but firm. "Mom, what did you just do? Ava is your granddaughter. She is your blood. You do not get to lay a hand on her." My mother took a step back, maybe realizing for a split second that she had gone too far, but then she just doubled down on her cruelty. "I was teaching her some manners," she snapped. "She needs to learn her place." Those words were the final, fatal blow. I looked around the silent yard at my father, who stood there mute, at Nathan and Megan, who were both staring at the ground, neither of them daring to say a word. And I knew in that gut-wrenching moment that this family was no longer my family. I took Ava's hand and I spoke loudly enough for every single one of them to hear. "Mom, Dad, you listen to me. Ava isn't just your granddaughter, she is an extraordinary young woman. She is a world-famous author who has overcome more pain and hardship than anyone in this house could ever even imagine. But you can't see any of that, can you? Because all you see is the color of her skin. I had hoped that today could be a chance for us to heal, but I was wrong. We don't belong here. I turned back to Ava, gently wiped the tears from her face, and said, "You are my light, Ava. Let's go home." She nodded, her grip on my hand tightening, and we walked out of that house without a single glance back. The entire drive home, Ava was silent, just staring out the passenger side window at the dark world rushing by. I was sick with worry, terrified that the scar from that day would stay with her forever. Finally, I asked, "Are you okay, sweetie?" She turned to me and smiled, though her eyes were still red and swollen. "I'm okay, Daddy," she said. "I don't need them. I have you and I have Mom in heaven." I pulled the car over to the side of the road, unbuckled my seatbelt, and hugged her as tight as I could. And I cried. Not from sorrow, but from an overwhelming sense of pride. Pride for my daughter, who was stronger than me, stronger than anything Clara could have ever dreamed. A few days after that disastrous Thanksgiving, I still couldn't shake the heavy feeling that had settled in my chest. The image of Ava standing there, frozen, holding her cheek after my mother had slapped her, replayed in my mind every time I closed my eyes. I tried my best to keep things as normal as possible for Ava. I took her to school, I read to her every night. I listened to her talk excitedly about the ideas she had for her next book. But deep down, I knew that we were both trying to heal from the fresh wound of that day. Ava, as always, was stronger than I was. She never brought up the incident at my parents' house, but I noticed small, subtle changes in her. She smiled a little less freely, and sometimes I would catch her staring off into the distance, as if she were grappling with some unanswerable question. I wanted to hold her and tell her that everything was going to be okay, but I wasn't sure I believed it myself anymore. How could I promise her that the world would treat her fairly when her own family had been so cruel? A few days later, while I was in the kitchen making dinner, pasta with tomato sauce, Ava's favorite, the phone rang. It was Nathan. His voice on the other end of the line was quiet, almost hesitant, a stark contrast to his usual booming confidence. "Leo," he said, "are you doing okay? Do you have a minute to talk?" I gripped the phone tighter, a familiar sense of unease creeping up my spine. "What's up, Nathan?" "Listen," he said. "Megan and we want to invite you and Ava over to our place this weekend. Right here in Raleigh, just a small get-together, just family. We want to apologize for what happened at Mom and Dad's house. We never expected things to go that far." I was silent for a long moment. A small part of me wanted to believe that Nathan and Megan were being sincere. They hadn't directly hurt Ava, it was true, but they also hadn't said a single word when our mother had slapped her. They had just stood there, their heads bowed, and let my daughter endure that humiliation. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even. "Nathan, thanks for the call, but I think it's too soon. Ava needs some time, and so do I." Nathan hesitated, then said, "Leo, we know Ava's special. We've read her books, and my God, she's incredible. We want to make things right. We want to be a part of your lives." His words caught me completely off guard. So they knew about Ava, about her books, about her success. I wasn't surprised, really. Ava was a global phenomenon, her face in newspapers and on TV, her name all over social media. But his admission just made me more wary. Were they reaching out now because they genuinely regretted their cowardice? Or was it because they'd heard about Ava's multi-million-dollar royalties? I didn't want to think the worst of my own brother, but after everything we had been through, I couldn't risk Ava's heart. Not again. "Nathan, I'm sorry," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "But Ava and I are doing okay. We don't need to force anything. I wish you and Megan all the best." I hung up the phone before he could say anything else. I looked over at Ava, who was sitting at the kitchen table, happily scribbling away in her notebook, and I told myself that I had done the right thing. My only job was to protect her. A week after Thanksgiving, on a cold, blustery evening, the doorbell rang. Ava was in the living room, sprawled out on the rug, completely absorbed in a thick science fiction novel. I opened the front door and my heart just stopped. My parents were standing on our doorstep. My mother was bundled up in a thick coat, my father in a wool cap. They both looked older and more frail than I remembered. My mother forced a smile, but her eyes were tight with tension. "Leo, my boy," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We came to see you and Ava. Is that all right?" I gripped the doorknob, completely at a loss for how to react. My first instinct was to slam the door in their faces, to scream at them that they had no right to just show up here after everything they had done. But then I saw Ava get to her feet, peeking out from behind my shoulder, her big, curious eyes taking in the scene. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of her, so I just gave a stiff nod and let them in. My mother immediately stepped forward and, before I could stop her, pulled Ava into a hug. "Oh, Ava, my sweet granddaughter," she said, her voice so sickeningly sweet I barely recognized it. "I am so sorry about the other day. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't. I lost my temper. Can you ever forgive me?" She kissed Ava on the forehead, and I saw my daughter stiffen in her arms, not returning the embrace. My father stood behind her, quieter, but then he spoke up. "Leo, we were wrong," he said. "We want to start over. We want to be a family for you and for Ava. You're our blood." He looked over at Ava, attempting a smile. "You're so talented, Ava. We've heard that you write books, that you've made a lot of money. We're so very proud of you." His words sent an icy chill down my spine. So they knew. They knew about Ava's money, of course they did. Her story was everywhere, from the local paper to national television. I looked at my mother, at the cloying way she was stroking Ava's hair, and I saw the lie in her every movement. They weren't here for Ava. They weren't here to be a family. They were here because of her fame, because of her money. A fresh wave of anger surged through me, but I managed to hold it back. I didn't want Ava to have to witness another ugly fight. "Ava, sweetie, can you go up to your room for a little while?" I asked gently. Ava looked from me to my parents, gave a small nod, and then grabbed her book and ran upstairs. When it was just the three of us, I stood up straight and looked both of my parents directly in the eye. "Mom, Dad, thank you for coming," I said, my voice cold and even. "But I think we need to stop this right here. What happened at Thanksgiving wasn't just a momentary loss of control. You hurt my daughter, Mom, and neither of you has ever stood up for us. Not once. And now, all of a sudden, when Ava is successful, you want to be a family? I can't trust that." The color drained from my mother's face. She started to speak, her voice sputtering. "Leo, you're misunderstanding. I am truly sorry. I want to be close to you and Ava." But her voice faltered, and I could see the panic in her eyes. My father cut her off. "Leo, we're getting old," he said. "We just want to reconcile, and we're struggling. If you and Ava could help us out a little." That was it. That was the final straw. "Enough," I interrupted him. "Ava and I don't owe you anything. You disowned me when I married Clara. You abandoned me when she died. And now you have hurt my daughter. I will not let you get near her ever again. Please, just leave." My mother burst into tears, but I didn't back down. My father pulled her to her feet, muttering something under his breath about how stubborn I was. They left, and as the front door clicked shut behind them, I leaned back against the wall, my breathing heavy and ragged. I felt a confusing mix of pain and relief. Pain, because there was a time when I had loved my parents, when I had hoped against hope that they might one day change. And relief, because I knew I had done the right thing. I had protected Ava, I went upstairs to Ava's room and found her sitting on her bed, clutching her book to her chest. "Daddy," she asked quietly, "are Grandma and Grandpa gone?" I nodded, sat down on the edge of her bed and pulled her into a hug. "Yes, sweetie, they're gone. I'm so sorry, Ava. I never wanted you to have to go through that again." Ava looked up at me, her eyes shining in the soft light of her bedside lamp. "I'm okay, Daddy," she said. "I have you, and that's all I need." Then she smiled, that beautiful, radiant smile that was all Clara, and I knew that no matter how cruel the world could be, Ava and I would always have each other. We would always be each other's strength. After my parents left that night, a strange sense of peace settled over me. The sound of the front door closing wasn't just the end of a painful chapter. It was an affirmation that Ava and I were on our own path now, a path of our own choosing. I did the right thing, I told myself. No matter how hard it gets, I will always protect her. Ava looked up from her book and smiled at me, and that one smile, Clara's smile, was enough to banish any lingering doubts from my heart. In the weeks that followed, our life settled back into its familiar, comfortable rhythm. I continued my work as a nurse at Mercy General, pulling long shifts to check on patients and then coming home with stories from my day to share with Ava. The job was still demanding, but it kept me grounded. It kept me connected to the memory of my life with Clara back when we were young and dreamed together of making the world a better place. Ava, for her part, continued to write with a tireless passion. She had already started a new project, a book about a group of children who overcome prejudice and bigotry inspired by her own experiences. "Dad," she told me one evening, her eyes sparkling with determination, "I want other kids like me to know that they can do anything." I nodded, my throat tight with a mixture of pride and worry. The world out there was still a harsh and unforgiving place, and I didn't want Ava to have to face it all by herself. But she wouldn't have to. I would always be there for her. We were a team, a small but fiercely resilient little family. Every evening after dinner, Ava and I would sit together at our kitchen table. I'd read my medical journals or watch a baseball game on my tablet, and she would write. Sometimes Ava would read passages from her new book out loud to me, her clear voice full of emotion and conviction. I would listen, not just as her father, but as her biggest fan. Ava didn't just write stories, she wrote stories that healed, stories that made people believe they could find their way out of the darkness. Ava's success continued to grow. My father sold millions of copies and was eventually translated into over 20 languages. Ava was invited to speak at literary conferences all over the world. One day, a letter arrived from a school in South Africa. A group of students had written to tell her that her book had inspired them to dream bigger despite growing up in poverty. Ava read the letter to me, her eyes glistening with tears, and said, "Dad, I think Mom would be proud of me." I pulled her into a hug and said, "Mom has always been proud of you, Ava, and so am I." But with all the success came a new kind of pressure. The media's attention on us intensified, and they weren't just interested in Ava's talent anymore. They were fascinated by our story, the white single father and his brilliant mixed-race daughter. Some articles celebrated Ava as a symbol of resilience and hope, but there were also the inevitable vicious online comments. Racist slurs about her skin color, or accusations that an 11-year-old girl couldn't possibly have written such powerful books on her own. I tried to shield Ava from the worst of it, but she was too smart, too perceptive. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and caught her reading the comments section of an online article. "This girl is only famous because of her parents' sad story," one of them read. Ava calmly closed the laptop, looked up at me and said, "Dad, I don't care what they say. I write because I want to, and I write for Mom." I still don't know how an 11-year-old girl could be so strong, but I knew it was Clara's legacy. My wife had given our daughter more than just her beautiful smile. She had given her an unbreakable heart, the ability to transform her pain into a source of incredible strength. And I, in my own imperfect way, had tried my best to nurture that gift in her. One evening in early 2025, as a light snow fell outside our window, Ava pulled me into the living room. She was holding a new manuscript in her hands. "Dad," she said, "I want you to be the first person to read this." She handed me a thick stack of papers. It was the first draft of her new book, which she had titled Fearless Children. I sat down on the couch and began to read. Page after page, I felt my heart crack open. Ava had written about children from all over the world. Children who were looked down upon because of the color of their skin, their circumstances, or the size of their dreams. But in her story, these children didn't fall. They stood up, they held hands, and together they built a new world, a world where no one was ever left behind. The opening lines of the book hit me with the force of a physical blow. Ava had written, "I was born being called a person of color, but I don't understand. When I'm healthy or when I'm sick, my skin is still one color. When I'm happy or when I'm sad, my skin is still one color. So why do you call us people of color?" When I finally reached the last page, Ava was sitting beside me, watching my face expectantly. "What do you think, Dad?" she asked. I wiped the tears from my eyes and pulled her into my arms. "Ava," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "you're not just creating miracles. You are helping to change the world." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about our long, difficult journey. I thought about the happy, sun-drenched days with Clara, about the fateful night she was stolen from us, about the long, lonely years I struggled to raise our daughter on my own, and about the radiant light that Ava had become. I once believed that I wasn't strong enough, that I would never be able to overcome the pain of my loss or protect Ava from the cruelty of the world. But my daughter had taught me that true strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up no matter how many times you get knocked down. My family, my parents, Nathan and Megan, had stopped trying to contact me. Maybe they finally realized that I wasn't going to change my mind, or maybe they're just quietly plotting their next manipulative scheme. I don't really care anymore. The only thing I feel for them now is a kind of distant regret. Regret that they threw away their chance to truly know Ava, the incredible, brilliant, kind-hearted young woman that Clara and I had raised. But I don't need them. Ava and I, we are enough for each other. I still keep up one of our old habits. Every single night I read a passage to Ava from Clara's old diary. It's the one she kept while she was pregnant with Ava, and it's filled with all of her hopes and dreams and messages for her unborn daughter. There's one line that still gets me every time I read it. "Ava, you are my light. No matter how dark this world gets, you just keep shining, okay?" Ava has done that, and I know that somewhere Clara is smiling. Our story isn't a fairy tale with a neat and tidy happy ending. The world still has its dark corners, its ugly prejudices, its senseless injustices. But I have learned that love, my love for Clara and my love for Ava, is stronger than all of it. That love is what gives me the strength to get out of bed each morning, to protect my daughter, and to believe that together we can make a difference. Ava is now an inspiration, not just for other kids, but for anyone who has ever felt like they don't belong. She writes, she speaks, and she lives her life with the same kind of open, generous heart that Clara had. And I am still just Leo Caldwell, an ordinary nurse, a father trying to do the right thing. But when I look at Ava, I know that I have done the most important thing I will ever do in my life. I have raised a strong, compassionate, and utterly fearless young woman. Our message is a simple one, but I hope it is one that will echo far and wide. The love of a family can overcome any prejudice, any pain. Stand up for the people you love. Let them shine even when the world is trying its best to dim their light. Ava is living proof of that, and I, her father, will forever be proud to be a part of her story.